This country, when we formed the Labor Party, went out and redistributed wealth downwards. Got a working wage, workers' compensation, a 40-hour week. We systematically unemployment. When you go through all of the great social developments in the early 20th century, it came out of here. But the greatest thing was democracy and inclusion. Now, there's always false news. That's what's got us in the First World War. False news that England was good and colonialism was good. But what there has been against false news is a willingness in this country, in the roots of this country, to recognise the sovereign rights, as we're doing today, of our Indigenous people. And in recognising that, recognising ourselves. Because it's their land, they're connected to the land. And if we're not connected to them and understand them, we can never fully understand ourselves, and we can't have any self-esteem in its truest sense. That's why we recognise the land, and that's why we recognise the elders. Elders is about accumulation of wisdom and experience and making sure that that is seamless from generation to generation. And that's why we recognise elders. And again, I'm recognising the Indigenous elders and also the elders here, past and present, and many elders in the future I know are standing here because you are acting out what you believe in, not just through talk, through action. And I want to recognise you. To John, for a man who wasn't going to make a speech, where is he? It was a cracker. He's taken it. John's gone, has he? I was going to thank him for clothing my family for the first 15 years of my life. We had a big Irish Catholic family at Riverwood, and that was down to St Vinny's. That's where you got all the grouse gear, you know. Or your brother handed it down. I had older brothers and or your elder sister. So he was very powerful, and he also made the connection that this is just not about trade unionism or workers. This is about basic Australian social rights. This is about equity. This is about knowing that we live in a fair society. See, we would all have thought that if you're elected to Parliament, it's the ultimate height of public service. The whole thing is a fabric around the order of Australia, the ability to do things selflessly. The whole wage structure of Parliament is structured around what we earn in the community. The whole process of democracy, one of vigorous debate, and if you like, the dialectic, the political dialectic. And I don't know, I wish John was here. He sort of went from Christianity to Marxism, somewhere in between in some of those things. The whole dialectic was about, let's have the debate, let's have the thesis, let's have the antithesis, but let's have the synthesis. That's what we are. That's why we're a proud country. So I'm a baby boomer. They say it these days like, you know, I'm an escaped criminal. But the reality was I came out of a generation of working men and women that went to war. My immediate generation before me came out of war and poverty and depression. And the opportunity that Australia opened up, that's why they were such great Democrats. That's why we owned the Commonwealth Bank. That's why we accumulated. These weren't accidental things. In America, they'd privatised everything right from the start. We built a society in this country that was predicated around an infrastructure of fairness and participation. And behind that was the ultimate public service, to recognise and represent the very diverse and very mixed and eclectic nature of Australian society. And it wasn't that eclectic in those days. They're mostly Poms, you know, and Irish that had been sent out here on a one-way ticket, like my family, you know, because you might as well have sent them to the friggin' moon in those days because they could never get home and cause more trouble in England or Ireland or wherever they cause them trouble. He's a Gallagher, he knows about it. Have a look at that dial. He's got a face like a robber's dog, you know. Like this is our history. We've inherited, you know, so there wasn't a lot of diversity. But what we did, we understood fascism. We understood unfairness. We understood that redistributing wealth downwards didn't eliminate economic growth, and in fact it encouraged it. We understood that if you build houses for people, public housing for people, then you had a more functional society. That's why you went to war. 1 in 8 Australian seafarers died in the Second World War. 1 in 8. Never were recognised because they were mostly killed in Australian territory. You know, out off the iron boats, BHP boats, mostly torpedoed off the eastern coast. But that was never recognised. You know, but out of that, it was recognised in the sense that people joined trade unions and they didn't want war again. And they wanted a functional society. And they didn't want to be exploited on the job. And they didn't want to go to work and not know you weren't going to go to work the next week, the next month, and the next year. So they fought hard for the basic dignity to have the stability of working life, to build the stability of their family life, and their emotional life, and their intellectual life. And they weren't great intellectuals, but they knew that education and part of the future of this country was to have education and access. And the height, even then, of bipartisanship was not challenged. And Albo's right about Blackjack McEwen. He was as supportive of Australian National Line because he knew otherwise the colonial shipping interests and the monopolies would squeeze the Australian economy, which was basically wheat and wool in those days. They hadn't found the oil and the iron. They were going to squeeze it. And they were going to control the supply chain. So what we did, we controlled the supply chain. We got our product to market. We redistributed the wealth. And trade unions were as much as the fabric of that productivity and that delivery as any other single factor. These days, we're putting our deferred wages into that. We've set money aside out of the negotiations of our agreement, and that we didn't take it as a pint of beer, we didn't take it as a better car, we didn't take it to replace the fly screens at home. We put it aside out of our negotiations so we could live a dignified and decent life in retirement. So these days, working men and women are making a far greater contribution. They are capitalising the infrastructure. They're not ripping it off. It wasn't the GFC, wasn't because we were ripping it off. The GFC was because they were taking our money and that they were investing in it, and multiple investment with all of their various financial vehicles into such a degree and such a charge for wealth and greed and elitism. You know, just an extraordinary point in human nature, the greed of it, while we still have the modern equivalent of what's going on in Africa now. Millions, tens of millions of people in poverty and sequestration, material sequestration. And now we're the enemy. We're the enemy. Michaela Cash. And she is the public service. Well, we've got a message for them. We're not the enemy. And they're not the bloody public servants. They serve their own elite interests. And it's not a trade union thing. And it's not an ethnic thing. And it's not an age thing. And it's not an industrial thing. It is about having ownership of the country. Firstly, for the Indigenous people that were here first, and that's a matter of honour and respect. But secondly, for this wonderful social and political and economic model that we've built up. We've built up. I said it yesterday. Anzacs, they were workers. The Anzac tradition, yeah, that is an Australian tradition, but that was a working class tradition. You know, multiculturalism, yes, that is a great achievement. Getting rid of the White Australia policy, but that is a trade union achievement, first and centre. And trade unionism was a working community's identity. All of those things are the identity of the working community. And yet, the sovereign wealth of the country, being drilled out of Bass Strait, that provides a new generation of jobs, not many, high-tech, just as dangerous, if not more dangerous. You are able to be robbed by multinational capital that do not pay tax or pay no contributions, but through their sophisticated subterfuge, their lies and misinformation, their ownership of they're not public servants, those assholes, they're private servants. They have been privatised by multinational capital. This government has been privatised. And that's the only bloody privatisation I think I've ever agreed with, you know. But we should get rid of them. Like all privatisation, we should get rid of the whole fucking lot of them. Because they're not public servants. They don't give a rat's ass about the public. They don't give a rat's ass about those families down at Esso. They don't give a rat's ass about these guys dragged out of their home in the middle of the night when 1 in 8 Australian seafarers gave their lives to build this country. Yeah, in my father, our families, that the whole of the trade union movement after the war, the whole of the working community said, we have won the war. We have beaten the war against fascism. We have created an opportunity in this country and we should all share in it. And now, after all of this, these people think, because of the power that they represent, that they personify, because of the cynicism, the lack of morality, the lack of ethics, the lack of the inability to tell the bloody truth. Michaela Cash couldn't lie straight in bed. They don't respect the Senate. They subterfuge around the Senate. They don't respect the democracy. They don't. Well, I've got something for you. You lot up there, we don't effing support or respect any one of yous. And I'm saying that as an Australian. I'm saying that as a Democrat. I'm saying that as someone who is involved in civil rights. And I'm saying that as a human being. Get the bloody hell out of the joint and let's get some people in here that will continue to rebuild this country the way we've been doing it for the last 200 years, and the Indigenous people have been doing it for another 40,000 years before that. Thanks very much, comrades.